Hello everybody, welcome back. Welcome to Season 3 of EUROCONTROL Aviation StraightTalk. Thanks for joining us, it's a pleasure to have you. My name's Andrew Charlton and today we are going to be talking all matters UK. Not a member of the European Union anymore, still very much a member of EUROCONTROL. We are going to talk to the new head of the UK CAA, Sir Stephen Hillier. But as ever on Straight Talk, before we do that, I'm going to ask the Director General, Mr. Eamonn Brennan, if he'd be so kind as to bring us up to date with the market information. Eamonn, please.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Q4's edition of Straight Talk. Today we welcome Sir Stephen Hillier, the Chair of the UK CAA, and with a vast experience in civil and military matters throughout Europe. And we really look forward to the conversation that Andrew and him will have subsequently. I want to look at the network headlines, how we've been performing for the last while. So first of all, it's important to look at just basically where we are. We're roughly at about 70% in Europe. The intra-European flows, that's traffic within Europe, is at about 74%, holding up really, really well. What's concerning us, of course, is the long haul. And the North Atlantic has not opened yet. The American market has not opened yet. Asia is still in difficulty. So we're anchored much low, depending on cargo, periodic operations there. So basically, for the last 2 weeks, we've been at about 71% of network traffic in Europe. It's worthwhile looking now at how the major groups have performed in Europe since the start of the pandemic. And here you can see, the sudden drop that happened and gradually how over the last number of months that everybody has pulled back together. And it is interesting to see that, Ryanair shoots up very suddenly there in the middle of the summer to take top spot there as part of the recovery, followed by Air France KLM. It's also worth looking at how the low-cost carriers have performed. So let's have a look at those just for a moment. So first of all, Ryanair is down 8% for the last week. Very similar with Wizz -11, Pegasus -8. EasyJet struggling a little bit in the UK market because the restrictions there have been difficult, but starting to come back now with 1,000 flights a day, and also the same with Vueling. So low cost have driven the recovery of the market for this summer. The legacy and long-haul carriers have had a more difficult time. First of all, Turkish, with a good domestic market and a good cargo performance, is doing very, very well. Air France, KLM, cargo is very strong. Also, they have some very good destinations that actually give them capacity. Lufthansa struggling a little bit, but the big outlier is British Airways. And here, this will be part of today's discussion, I'm sure, with Sir Stephen. But the point is, the restrictions, the North Atlantic, have been much more restrictive on BA than anybody else. But we're hoping in the months ahead, with the easing of restrictions, that we will see an improvement here. It's also worthwhile just looking at the airports. I mean, if you have a look at, Heathrow, it's still down well over 40%. And that's really significant. The same with Charles de Gaulle. So the hubs are really struggling. And they're struggling because long haul has not recovered. So, you can see that Amsterdam is still the largest airport in Europe over the last while, followed by Istanbul. But generally, struggling. And recent figures from ACI show that the actual passenger effect is even greater than the flight effect. So passengers are still low, particularly for the large airports. Having a look at the States, you'll be glad to see that the UK has moved into second position. After languishing down at 8th and 9th for many, many weeks, there's now a return. So the easing of restrictions, and we very much welcome the easing of restrictions from the UK government on travel this week. But it should see a little bit more of a return to normal, improvements for Heathrow, improvements for British Airways, improvements for EasyJet. Germany still remains the strongest state, followed by Spain, of course, and France. So a little bit of return to more normality. But as a general message, in Europe, we're stuck about 70%. A point I think we should also look at is we're all aware of the rising prices of domestic energy, but this is also coming through. Jet fuel now is over $200 a barrel. This is the highest it's been in many, many months. And this is providing another challenge to recovery. What you have on one side is yields are lower, and jet fuel prices higher, so there will be a profitability squeeze as well as we go through the difficult winter period, which we have virtually every year in the airline industry. And then just kind of towards the end, it's worth looking at how has the UK traffic held up. You know, UK has not performed that well during the pandemic. It's been at a low level, but it's starting to move up. But you can see it's still significantly below the 2019 7-day average in the UK, which is the blue line there, you know, and it's starting to move. So hopefully, I would like to think that with the North Atlantic opening, the easing of the travel restrictions, we'll see a huge improvement in the UK in the months ahead. And we really would welcome this from a network perspective. I think it's also important to say, look, there's 4 big issues that we need to talk about, and I'm sure that Sir Stephen and Andrew will discuss them today. First of all, the COVID recovery. It's been a shock to everybody worldwide in the aviation. It's not unique to the UK. Also, the whole area of post-Brexit safety regulations, certification, relations with the regulator in Europe. Also, the whole capacity in the southeast of the UK. You know, the discussion on the second runway has been going on for years. Where are we with this? And of course, the UK's plans towards net zero. And that, of course, brings me to the final point. You know, COP26 will be the big news item all through November, happening in Glasgow, hosted by the UK. So the very best of luck to the UK to hope this, and I hope that we get a good result. So over to you now, Andrew and Sir Stephen. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I hope you enjoy the interview that follows. Best of luck.
So, Stephen, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Straight Talk.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Delighted to have this opportunity.
We saw in the video that your background is obviously in the Air Force, the Royal Air Force. Do you think that helps in running the Civil Aviation Bureau? What do you learn from your years in the Air Force?
Well, I mean, if I can, firstly just wind the clock way back, is that my actual foundations of my flying career were in civil aviation and general aviation in the UK when I got my private pilot's license. And so that was my first connection with the Civil Aviation Authority. So many years later, having the opportunity to apply to become chair was just something which felt personally important to me, because aviation and aerospace has been my life, and I wanted to contribute in any way that I could. In terms of my Air Force career, so what's the benefit? Well, clearly it's continued to immerse me in aerospace, albeit sometimes of a bit of a different character. But I think the key components are I've experience of leading large organizations, experience of managing complex portfolios and programs and doing risk management within a highly regulated environment. And it's those sort of skills that I think and I hope that I bring to the Civil Aviation Authority as it deals with not just the greatest challenge in its history as we're experiencing at the moment, but also it's got some immense challenges going forward. And I just want to play my part in helping deal with them in any way I can.
It has got some interesting challenges, hasn't it? I mean, first of all, picking up on the military stuff, EUROCONTROL is the only agency where the civil and military combine. And the UK has probably got a higher integration of military and civil, both in terms of operating in the same control centres and so forth. Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think the military has too much say, not enough say? How do you think it should work?
Well, I mean, it's got to be a balance and it's got to be circumstances dependent. I mean, different requirements at different times. But I think that relationship works well. And indeed, it has to work well, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe. I mean, I've done a lot of flying in military within Europe. And we have constrained airspace. There's a lot of demand for that airspace. And so I think in this part of the world, perhaps more than most others, making sure that we can use that valuable commodity that we have, the airspace, in the most productive way to meet both those military tasks and the civilian requirements. I just applaud our ability to do that in such a constructive way.
I'll come back to some of those issues because I think they're really important, and new entrance to the airspace, of course, is an important component of what we have to do. But let's start with the pandemic and what have you. There's been a lot of talk for a long time now about building back better. What do you think better is going to look like?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing when looking at that question is firstly to recognise the scale of the challenge and the crisis which has confronted civil aviation, and I think that is just an important bedrock of understanding the impact that this has had, and therefore the challenges of building back better or building back at all in so many ways. So we have a significant challenge. You know, we've just seen some of the data. Clearly that data is improving, but it's a gradual improvement. There's a long way to go, and there's a lot of difficult issues we still got to get to grips with. So I don't look at it and say, hey, we've done we've recovered, and now we're looking at betterment. Let's make sure we've got the foundations properly sorted. But in terms of what does Build Back Better look like, then I think the first thing that's in my mind is about resilience. I mean, what we have comprehensively demonstrated in the face of this enormous public health challenge, this global public health challenge, is that we didn't have the degree of resilience that we needed. And I think we need to, as we look into the future, is work through that. Is there will be further challenges in the future. It may be another pandemic, it may be something else. It's going to be another shock along the way. How are we, both nationally and internationally, better able to respond to that? So that's the first part of Build Back Better for me. I mentioned the international element is, well, let's take the lessons about, how do we work in a more harmonized way with common standards? How do we ensure that we don't have the disparities that we see at the moment? That's got to be part of Building Back Better. And then, of course, the final part of Build Back Better is is the greatest strategic crisis that civil aviation has faced, but it's not the greatest strategic long-term challenge that global aviation faces. That's all about sustainability, decarbonisation, achieving net zero. So Build Back Better can't be, if you like, a sequential activity as we'll do this and then we'll do that and then we'll come to sustainability, as we are already doing through so many great initiatives across all parts of the enterprise. We need to build back in a way which recognises that by 2050, we have set ourselves a challenge, and it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
It will indeed. You might excuse our audience something of an ironic smile when you talk about building international cooperation and coordinating on standards, because it's, of course, impossible not to talk about Brexit. It must have... How do you see your relationship with EASA going forward?
Well, the relationship with EASA remains a positive one. I mean, the UK clearly was a member of EASA for many years, and I think an important contributor to
without
EASA.
doubt, yeah.
So we've got those, not just those, if you like, professional relationships, but we have those personal relationships. We know each other. And I very strongly believe that we have a common interest between now the Civil Aviation Authority in the UK and EASA to promote the highest standards of safety and efficiency and effectiveness of operations within European airspace. So that relationship is there. Now, what I'm not going to say is that we're somehow, we're not affected by the fact that EASA is part of the European Union and we're not in the European Union anymore. So this is going to be a process that works out over time. We had the starting point, if you like, on the 31st of December of last year. We have moved from that starting point and gradually increased our relationship, both with EASA and on bilateral relationships. We've also reached out, I think, more into other areas of the world to develop relationships there, and this will be a continual process. But there's still much work to do, and I'm not in any way saying that somehow that withdrawal from EASA, the impact that it has on aviation in the UK is behind us. Lots still to do. And the final thing I'd just sort of emphasise, if I might, is that within the CAA, we did rebuild the capacity to be a fully effective sovereign regulator. We have that capacity now, and we are delivering all of the things that you would expect us to deliver in that respect.
So that's there's a number of questions come out of that, I think, but very interestingly, when I was speaking to friends of mine who work in the CAA prior to Brexit, they were saying at least 1,000 new staff will be required. Is that the sort of capacity build back you're talking about?
No, there's nothing like that. Nothing like that at all. I mean, there are a number of functions as per any major aerospace nation, which we retained in any case. We simply built on those foundations and then built, particularly back in the state design capability. I can't remember the specific number. It was a figure that would have been in front of my mind about a year ago, but we had identified all the posts, we filled all the posts we required, and there's nothing like a thousand people, a fraction of that amount.
Right. Well, I'll give you the name of the person who estimated that later, if you like. But more importantly, much more importantly, what are you doing about, how do you foresee standard setting and certification and things like that?
Well, I mean, firstly is that we recognise that we need to move carefully here. Is that there are benefits of being part of. There were benefits of being part of EASA and that standardisation across that network. Clearly, we're still a member of ICAO. So there, those things remain, and we don't want to create divergence just for divergence's sake. But equally, if we identify there are areas of our previous regulatory set where we think that we might have an opportunity to be more adaptable and more agile in a way which, as I say, doesn't diverge us and cause difficulties in our international relationships and our international activities, if there are those opportunities, then we should take them. And we are actively investigating that. I think that where that particularly lands is in relation to new technologies and new innovation. We all know that remotely piloted air systems are changing the dynamic considerably. We all know that innovation in things like hydrogen-powered aircraft, electric-powered aircraft, all of these things we're pushing new boundaries, and I think we do see the opportunities there. To be more agile and more adaptable, and we're working out how we make that happen.
I'm really disappointed that you've only gone straight into the future. I was really hoping you'd spill the beans on some of the stuff that's currently happening, where you could talk about more agility and so forth, and where you're going to diverge from EASA. But you're absolutely right. The new technology is something that's going to have to be factored in. The UK, no secret, the UK, of course, has got very crowded airspace. That's a factor of how busy it is and how small it is. How do you see getting UAMs and drones and indeed spaceships into all that airspace? Is that going to be possible?
The short answer is yes, and it's always worth looking at UK airspace in the round. I mean, it's we always tend to look at the southeast of England and very intensely congested airspace, but there are other parts of the UK where far less congested. And so you mentioned spaceflight, for example, and the CAA is now the UK's space regulator. When we're looking at our spaceports, they are in areas where it's going to be far easier to bring that sort of activity into operation. But within those bits which are congested, like the southeast of England, well, if you take remotely piloted air systems, we have got to get to the place where we can successfully integrate them into the rest of the air traffic management process. As per many other nations at the moment, when we are doing beyond visual line of sight operations with remotely piloted systems, is temporary danger areas, creating segregated airspace, and that just makes the problem even greater.
Well, indeed, surely it does. Yeah.
So there's a bit of investment here. Is that so we have those TDAs at the moment. But that allows us to build up our evidence and our information to allow us to get to the position that we need to be, which is proper integration in non-segregated airspace with these systems. That's the key that we need to crack, and I'm confident that we will. but only through that means will we unlock the full potential here.
Well, the UK's been going through a really major airspace redesign process for some time. And as the head of NATS, Martin Rolfe, famously once said, it's not like you can rely on a replacement bus service when you have to redesign the airspace. And we're going to have to bring drones and other things into balance. But in that context, does the Southeast need a new runway?
Well, my perspective on this is that we've had clearly a catastrophic reduction in air traffic volume at the moment. And that's led some people to say, well, do you need more runway capacity in the face of that? And my response is, well, that argument would only be valid if you make the assumption that air traffic volumes in 2019 were the highest that they will ever be in the UK. I don't think that's a reasonable assumption to make. Now, clearly, we've had a major interruptions due to the pandemic, but I think it is entirely appropriate to assume that we will get beyond those 29 figures in time. Now, I can't give you that timeline. I don't think anybody authoritatively can at the moment, but we will get to that point, and therefore additional runway capacity in the southeast will come back onto the table at some point.
But then we get up to the place, don't we, where you start to clash with some of the commitments that have been made pursuant to the Climate Change Committee and some of the work that they're doing. How do you reconcile the airspace design, the new entrants, growth, and your commitments to reduced carbon and carbon emissions and so forth?
Well, I mean, this is the challenge for the whole sector, isn't it?
Well,
is
indeed.
That we want a successful enterprise, we want it to thrive, and we want it to grow. How do we do that in a way which is compatible with achieving net zero in 2050? That is all of our challenge.
How do we do it? How do we do it so that we achieve net zero?
Okay. Well, I mean, it'd be tempting for me to say, well, here's the plan, but if I don't think anybody has that complete plan at the moment. What I would say is that it is that combination. It will require individual government policy. It will require international cooperation on achieving that net zero 2050 target. It will require innovation, both from within and without, if you like. It will require air traffic management, and it will require a regulatory role. And the regulator will have to have a role in addressing all of those challenges and ensuring not only that we, for example, respond to new innovation, but that we're up there with new innovation so that we can help enable that activity. And it's certainly something which is very clearly in my mind is that the Civil Aviation Authority has two key roles. One is that regulatory role, and the other role is to enable the sector that we regulate and to make sure that it is as successful as possible, consistent with our regulatory responsibilities. So I'd say I would, if I had the answer, nobody has the answer at the moment of how do you join all these things together in order to achieve this success. It is a common goal that we all share. And, that we need to make sure that we take all of those strands that I mentioned and progress them and with a sense of urgency. It is certainly something, when we go back to Build Back Better, is that I would say that compared to where we were a year, 18 months ago, that sense of urgency on this net zero challenge is far greater, and I welcome that.
Do you think that we should just talk about net zero 2050, or should we be putting in place a series of milestones and stepping stones?
I do think that is appropriate. I mean, I think that the goal will be to achieve it by 2050. But not to try and make it, well, it's all backloaded, if you like, and that suddenly in the last few years we will get there. That's not how it would work out in practice, or how it can work out in practice. And I believe that there will be a public desire to see it happen in a more incremental way over time. Now, in terms of deciding what those stages would be along the way, well, I think that requires more development at this stage. I think the one bit that very much focuses my mind is in relation to sustainable aviation fuel. We are all placing quite a high dependency on that. But equally, it's a technology which looks like it will play a major role in achieving our goals. So I think that is one area where you could look at and say, okay, how do we progress on the SAF, and what timelines are we aiming for? What stages are we looking for along that way?
It's a really vexing question, isn't it? Because as we speak today, SAF represents 0.05% of the total fuel uplift. Yet we're clearly going to need to increase that. And well, I nearly said SAF doesn't grow on trees, but of course some of it does. But SAF is, we're very much at the start of that process, and the clock is ticking, isn't it? It's a really urgent problem.
I agree, and as I say, we have a significant dependency on the success of that approach. But equally, we are already demonstrating, the simple fact that, you mentioned that we're already doing this to some degree indicates that it's something that is potentially successful, and we should reinforce that success. But it can't be the only show in town. This has got to be a multi-strand approach, and there is ultimately no magic bullet. This is a series of incremental gains which will get us towards the goal that we're all aiming for. And I think from a CAA perspective, how I describe it is that we are ambitious within the responsibilities that we have. And we don't set out to play the leading role in this. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think anybody could claim to do that. But what I do say is the Civil Aviation Authority has a leading role to play, and we are just putting together our strategy of how we are going to ensure we play that leading role.
How are we going to fund it?
Fund what?
The SAFs, the development, all these changes, net zero by 2050?
Well, another of those key challenges. And as ever with these major innovation or technological sort of transformations, it will be a combination of, it'd be pump priming to get things going. It'll be a combination of those who deliver the service. It's not for me to speak on what the government's role is on this, but at any stage when you see these major technological inflection points, it is that combination of government and private and the appropriate investment in the right places. It is simply one of the further great challenges that we're going to have to face.
I read a study, a survey that was released yesterday of 22,000 people, and they seem quite supportive of indeed increasing the price of tickets to be able to fund some of this stuff. Do you have a view on that?
Well, my view is that currently when we present information to consumers, then the price is a very, the economic price is a very clear figure. I think that we need to provide more information to consumers so they understand, well, the environmental consequences of their choices, and allow them to make choices based on that sort of environmental impact. Now, we've already started to see this. There's some increased levels of information out there. From a CAA perspective, ultimately our key role is it's about safety, security, and the interests of consumers and those that fly. So we certainly want to move in the direction of giving consumers greater information, understanding the environmental impact to allow them to exercise their choice.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the real issues, isn't it, as people have become more informed. Do you perceive a bit of a change in the ground in that sort of area? Consumers being more concerned about things like the environment and emissions?
The data, we do collect that data, and it is a growing element of consumers' decision making is the environmental impact. I don't believe we collected the data for a little while because, needless to say, the volumes of passenger activity are low. But I can't see that interest from consumers in the environmental impact reducing. I can only see it continuing to increase.
Well, I think so too. I'm sure that's right. You talked about the volumes hopefully growing. Obviously we all hope that. We've seen the UK, all of Europe really, was very badly affected by the very patchwork way in which restrictions are imposed on travellers and then lifted on travellers and so forth. In a perfect world, I guess all the changes would have happened simultaneously and would all go away, but we could all travel again. But are you frustrated by some of the changes in the rules and the lack of consistency and things like that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's about public health, and public health considerations are a matter for the government. It's for governments to decide based on their individual sort of requirements and perspectives what restrictions they think is appropriate. But I think it goes back to that point that I mentioned in terms of Build Back Better, is having seen that sort of patchwork that you highlight, is let's take the opportunity to look forward into the future and say, when the next crisis comes, however many years that might be, do we want to take this approach again, or are there alternative ways? I think also we need to make sure that we don't paint too dark a picture. There has been a lot of great work being done, and the UK has certainly been supporting the ICAO work and the CART work. And as it happens, just earlier I was in the ICAO's high-level COVID conference and having these sorts of discussions. And so we have existing mechanisms to develop our international cooperation. We've done it in the past. So let's use them in working out how we go forward from here as part of that Build Back Better.
So do you think we can get the cart in front of the runaway horse that is the whole pandemic thing?
Well, I think we just need to look at the evidence which says if you don't, this is what it looks like. So here's the opportunity to make sure that you are better prepared for next time.
Right. Coming back, if I may, changing subjects, and coming back, if I may, to the whole subject about drones and unmanned airspace and unmanned so on. Did the CAA learn any lessons from the Gatwick airport drone incursion?
So, I mean, that's, a few years ago, and I was involved in my previous role. I think that, let's take it to the top level lesson again, is that the aviation enterprise is not always as resilient as it thinks it might be, and that a relatively low-cost technology with somebody who has malign intent can cause enormous disruption. We need to make sure, therefore, that we are prepared for that. Now, I can't go into detail of what individual airports will have done, but I certainly know that it has resulted in people thinking through those sort of consequences, doing the planning of saying, well, what if? And next time, it may not be a drone with somebody with whatever intent. It might be something else. How do we respond, and how do we respond quickly? Because we see the consequences if we can't.
Do you think that, heaven forfend, do you think that were a similar situation to happen this Christmas, you would respond better? Or more quickly? I'm sorry, I'm sure the response was great, but
well, as ever, you learn from experience, and so we had that experience, and I think also we put a lot of more procedural things in place is that we have been much clearer about drone operators and the responsibilities that they have. And so, if you like, going upstream of the problem, enforcement agencies now have a much clearer idea of how to deal with such challenges as well. So that combination of experience and what we have done subsequently certainly ought to make us better prepared. But what we really need to do is think hard about, well, the next challenge which comes our way won't be exactly the same as the previous one. Let's have that imagination to think about, well, what else might come at our weak spots in our operation.
Yeah, it's always a great question to ask, isn't it? And imagination often can't get to where reality takes us. But using your imagination, how do you see the unmanned airspace sector developing in the UK?
So I am very straightforward about saying that it will become an ever greater proportion of the air traffic activity in the UK. Now, some interpret that as, well, therefore that's going to be to the detriment of others, or does that mean others are declining? I'm not saying that those other areas are declining, and our goal is to be able to integrate all users. But as a proportion of the overall air traffic volumes in the UK, it's going to get greater. And actually, I celebrate that. I mean, that's part of the history of aviation, isn't it? And that new capabilities arrive, we bring them into the enterprise, and we yield all the benefits. So I think it's exciting. I'm not saying it's not challenging at all. It's very challenging, but this is just part of the future, and we need to be prepared for it.
So the CAA clearly regulates the airspace. These guys will be, men and women will be flying through the, well, unmanned indeed, flying through the airspace. But is there a role also for the local governments, do you think, that will be overflown and from where these sorts of devices will be taking off?
Well, I mean, I don't think we've explored that in detail at the moment, but, absolutely is that the CAA's duty is safety and security of consumer interests of those who fly, and those who might be affected on the ground underneath. And so we need to make sure that we have those active conversations with the representatives of those underneath. I mean, I live in central London. I can easily see in the future a great number of remotely piloted air systems delivering all sorts of tasks. I think that people would want to be reassured that at the local level, they had some understanding of, well, how does that affect me, as well as that understanding at the national level, which the CAA would have. So I think you're absolutely right. That is an area that we will need to develop further. And we already have those relationships with local authorities in relation to aerodromes and airports and the like. So it's not new activity in principle for us.
But the UAM sort of sector will, if you like, bring the airports into the cities, won't they? I mean, if you can take off from the top of a building, that becomes an airport, an aerodrome, I guess. But my point is that we're moving the airports to the passengers now, which is going to have an enormous planning implication for local governments and so forth. Yeah.
Absolutely. We are very interested in the impact of flying on those underneath. So it's a sort of natural progression for us.
Right. Just changing subjects again for a moment. The UK, and I realise this is a government decision, not the CAA, but the UK gave very much less support to the international airlines, to the airlines of the UK, in the form of state aid and so forth, than many of its contemporaries in the rest of Europe. Does that, I mean personally, I applaud that decision, but are we getting back, do you think, to a place where national governments have a bigger say in what's going to happen in aviation as a result of that investment?
I mean, I clearly can't speak for other nations' governments and the role that they might play. And as you rightly point out, it's the UK government to decide how it wishes to, and whether it wishes to provide support in what ways. I think if I look at it just from a CAA perspective, is clearly we're aware of those debates, but our focus has to be in, well, how does this look on the ground, if you like? And what we have been heavily involved with our airlines and our airports is ensuring that whilst public health considerations are looked after, it's about safety, security, and the interests of consumers. And I think particularly as we now see recovery really getting going, is ensuring those basics continue to be in place. And we do so very mindful of the financial situation that a lot of those entities are in at the moment. We know the importance of repairing their balance sheets, and we need to be understanding of that, but equally do so in a way which says safety, security continues to be vital. So I think rather than what you describe, if you like, at the top level policy of is there state intervention or not, we are aware of it, but we're more focused on what does the outcome look like in day-to-day activity.
Right, and slots obviously will play an important part in that, but again, I suspect that's not within the CAA's bailiwick.
No.
Yeah, right. Pity, because I've got lots of questions about slots. Let me ask you, though, one last question that I always ask, and I think it's perhaps more relevant to today than normally. You're not in the European Union, as I said before, but you are in Eurocontrol. What's your view of Eurocontrol? How do you think Eurocontrol can do more, can assist the UK at this interesting time? And there are very few UK nationals in Eurocontrol. Do you see Eurocontrol, or sorry, let me ask that again. How do you see Eurocontrol for the UK going forward?
So, as you rightly point out, Eurocontrol is not part of the European Union. Therefore, we continue to be a member, just as we've been for many decades now. We think that that is vitally important. European airspace includes United Kingdom airspace. We want to ensure that we continue to be fully integrated. We want to emphasise that the UK continues to be engaged in Eurocontrol and ensuring that we have the safest, most effective and most efficient air traffic management across that geographical area. So in that respect, nothing has changed from what it was before. But I think what I want to do is just emphasize that nothing has changed, because there is, frankly, that perception that anything which starts with Euro doesn't now involve the United Kingdom. Well, that's not the case. Geography is geography, and Eurocontrol continues to be a vital part of the UK's air traffic management, and will continue to be in the future as well.
Indeed. That's a really good note to finish on. So, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. I think that was really interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can just remind you of our next two speakers. Next month, we'll be talking to Mr. Michael O'Leary, a man who perhaps doesn't need any introduction in what is now our traditional pre-Christmas O'Leary interview. And then after that, we're speaking to Mr. Stan Deal, who is Executive Vice President of Boeing, and we'll talk about what's going on there. So it leaves me only now to thank Sir Stephen one more time and to wish you all a very good day.